Welcome to the Cyber Business Podcast, where we feature top founders and entrepreneurs and share their inspiring stories. Now, let's get started with the show.
Matthew Connor here, host of the Cyber Business Podcast. Today, we're joined by Alex Dalay, CISO at IDB Bank. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Before we get too far in, a quick word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by cyberlinks.com. Hackers are getting smarter. Is your security keeping up? Cyberlinks sells industry-leading AI-powered cybersecurity solutions that detect threats in real time, so you know about an attack before the damage is done, not after. Learn more at cyberlinks.com. That's cyber, L-Y-N-X.com. And now back to our show. Alex, for those who aren't familiar, can you tell us about IDB Bank and your role there as CISO?
Yeah, certainly. So IDB Bank is a financial institution. It's been around for a little over 70 years. Our headquarters is in New York, and we're primarily a commercial bank as well as private banking and broker-dealer as well.
Yep. Makes perfect sense. So as CISO of a financial institution, I think especially in this modern day, I got to imagine that the stakes have never been higher. The number of attacks have never been higher. So, how do you approach that, right? Because I think for a lot of companies, cyber is on their mind, whether they have a CISO or not. I think cyber is kind of on everybody's mind these days, and as it should be. But in the financial institutions, the stakes are much higher. And you're a much bigger target, just kind of day to day. So you're in one of these key positions that I think everybody looks to for guidance and to see, worst case scenario, what's it like out there? So what's your advice to people?
Yeah, I mean, look, you're certainly right. Financial institutions do certainly get hit with a lot more attacks, but it makes sense, right? Because everybody's interested in money. But again, in this world or in this space, there's a lot of, fancy terminology, new products, new solutions, new threats, right? Vulnerabilities, scary words that are tossed around quite often. And it doesn't need to be so complicated, right? Sometimes it just comes down to the basics, the, foundational elements, right? Asset inventory, like it's a basic thing, right? But if you take a step back and think about it, is it really feasible to expect somebody to protect things if they don't know that they're out there, right? So you got to know what you have. Then the second piece is identity, like who has access to these resources. If you get those two foundational elements right, things will fall into place. And you talk about other aspects of it, like configuration management or the firewalls or DLP, all those other topics. Get the basics first. Understand what it is that you need to protect and who has access to it. Fix those. Everything else will fall into line. Yeah. From financial services regulatory perspective, there's obviously those expectations as well. But at the end of the day, you can build a good security program, but of course you need to align it with what the business needs and what the business is trying to do. Because I think there's a lot of misconceptions out there about what a CISO does or what a CISO is supposed to do, or there's some negative views on it. It's like the person that always says no, and I'm sure those things happen from time to time, but generally they do not. And if they do happen, that person's probably not going to be successful or be in that role for a long period of time. It's about compromise, right? Like just like in a marriage, you need to compromise. It's about understanding what is it that the business is trying to do. Because at the end of the day, they want to service their customers and they want to give them good products and services that make their lives better. And that makes them proud or to stay with the financial organization that they have. And the tricky part is always challenging the convenience with the security aspect of things.
Yeah. No, I think that's really solid advice, because I think all too often people start getting fancy and they focus on the really cool fancy parts of anything. It doesn't matter. I mean, even if you take something as simple as playing basketball, right? You can work on the fancy trick shots, but if you don't have the fundamentals down, you're not going to be winning the games, right? And I think that the same is true of cyber. It's really easy to get kind of interested in the fancy new things. But if the fundamentals aren't there, the fancy new things are going to have a hard time kind of plugging the holes that are lacking from the basics not being met, right? Yeah. Okay, so speaking of kind of fancy new things, I think AI is on everybody's mind all the time, and rightfully so, right? I mean, it is kind of the wave of the future. It's progressing rapidly. Where do you see AI playing a part kind of now and in the future when it comes to security?
From a security perspective, I mean, obviously AI, I certainly welcome it. I think it's going to be, quite the significant change, not just from a security perspective, but for, humans in general, right? It's going to change our lives. Once it gets to that stage that everybody's hoping for, the general intelligence portion, and it's coming. It's just a matter of time. From a security perspective, it has some advantages and disadvantages, right? If you think about like the core or the most foundational basics of security, a lot of what we do is, we're monitoring activity, we're looking at logs, we're looking at alerts, and humans have a certain capacity, and that's limited. Where AI comes in is it's able to take large sums of data and churn through it and analyze it. So I do think that there's going to be some movement there and some productivity gains to be had. And many organizations are moving towards that space. But again, keep in mind, AI is still in its infancy. And that's part of the challenge too, right? Like a lot of organizations want to adopt AI and AI tools. But nowadays, like we're having this conversation now, and if I was an AI expert when the conversation began, by the time that it's over, I can no longer say I'm an expert because like three or four large language models drop, or there's a new AI solution, or there's a new product. It's so rapidly evolving. Then there's the other side of it, right? The let's say the malicious side of AI. And the most prevalent area that we see it is in using attacks. Yes, there's some usage when it comes to crafting phishing emails and automating that process, and even engaging the individuals that respond to the phishing emails. The more dangerous part is what we would typically consider like the penetration testing or hacking attempts. Historically, there's been tools around for a long time to automate the pen testing activity or research, or let's say it's information gathering aspect of things. And where a human really differentiated themselves was that, as they're trying things, they're able to evaluate the response that's coming back from their attempts. Whereas a machine couldn't do that. A machine has a script to run, and it says, I'm going to try this. Did it succeed? Yes or no? If no, move on to the next one. Whereas a human could say, well, that didn't succeed, but I didn't necessarily get the response that I was expecting. So that gives me something to pivot off of and try, as opposed to just running through my script. Well, now AI can do that, and it can do it a lot faster than a human can. And that's where the challenge comes in, where the attacks are increasing in speed. And even, talking to peers, talking to my team, we're seeing the window be significantly reduced when it comes to like disclosure of vulnerabilities and attempts to exploit those vulnerabilities. Like they're almost happening in real time, which doesn't give a lot of time for us to remediate or assess the risk itself. So we have to take actions a lot more urgently.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. And I think one of the things I think is really interesting is right now we're in this stage where everybody, when they hear AI, they think LLM, and they're thinking, super intelligence, then the AGI. But I think the really interesting part when it comes to security is where, machine learning has been around for quite some time now, and it is a kind of a part of AI, right? It's a form of AI. And I
Right.
think the great part, I think where we see advantages now are in things like tools like Darktrace, for instance, where they use machine learning as a part of their of a kind of the basis for it. So you're getting that AI built in without the vulnerabilities of an LLM, where you've got these prompt injection vulnerabilities. And I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, how we counter prompt injections, and how we finally kind of fix that, because right now that's the big thing that stops it from being of much benefit to to a lot of security tools, right? It introduces more vulnerabilities than it does solving them, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's really cool to see some uses of AI in the right ways, And it's kind of like the self-driving car, I think. Like right now you see it like, oh, it's pretty a few years ago it was interesting and it was scary. Now it's getting a lot better. Now it's kind of like a good teenager driver. And you're like, okay, cool, but I'm still watching because I don't really trust you, right? And you can see where the road goes, and you can see, on the path that we're on, that ultimately the car is going to drive better than humans, and I'll feel a lot better. We're a ways off from that, and I think we're in a similar space with AI in security. But the challenge, I think, comes in like we're in this game of cat and mouse, or if you want to call it an arms race with the bad guys, right? They're starting to use AI to, so is it a matter of like you don't want to be bringing a knife to a gunfight, right? How do you balance that, right? If the bad guys are starting to use it, is this one of these things where, the sage advice is you really have to kind of keep up with the bad guys and start implementing things that are cutting edge. You got the basics down, but now you really do need something to kind of watch for vulnerable, like, you pointed out a really interesting one, like vulnerabilities as they come out now and they're discovered. They the time between exploit is very short now. Like you said, I mean, sometimes it's less than 24 hours before it's actively being exploited. And so having AI working to see those things, and because I think patch management is too difficult, often there isn't a patch in time. So you need I think that's where AI can come in and see those vulnerabilities, see strange activity and be like, this is weird. What are you doing here? Is that kind of where we need to be looking, to combat this challenge of the speed at which the bad guys are implementing things?
Yes, no, it is. It absolutely is. Because, like, let's take the vulnerability management example, right? And I'll throw another, industry buzzword like attack surface management, right? What a lot of people don't realize, or, when they look at or label vulnerabilities, is that they need to understand how a vulnerability gets classified and it gets scored, right? So let's take Microsoft, for example, that publishes the most vulnerabilities and patches. When they say that there's a vulnerability and they'll give it a rating of a 10, they make zero assumptions about the context of your environment and how it's configured. They assume that you have a server or a workstation exposed to the internet, no firewall, nothing is running, and it's exploitable. The key comes in is when you have to evaluate, is this vulnerability an exploitable thing in our environment, and how would that happen? And the devil's in the details of saying, well, to exploit the vulnerability, you need X, Y, and Z conditions to be true. And then, a human needs to go and look at the configuration of the network and look at the tools that are running and evaluate and say, oh, uh, yes, it might be rated a critical vulnerability out of the box and it's a 10, but it's not a 10 in the context of our environment. So do we need to drop everything and patch this immediately? No, we'll let it follow its course. We'll apply the patch just to practice good hygiene. But it's not a deal breaker. It's not an emergency for us. And to some extent, that is still done manually because AI is not there yet. There are attack surface management solutions out there. Because again, like you have to keep in mind, people think about vulnerabilities and they just assume that most of the hacks and exploits happen that way. The reality is that, most of them generally happen through phishing exercises or credential theft or social engineering, where they steal the credentials of somebody or they call the
Right.
help desk and pretend to be somebody. Because exploiting vulnerabilities is actually pretty hard. I mean, it's certainly possible, but it's pretty difficult. So the bad guys, of course, they're interested in making their lives easier as well. So they'll go down the path that's, going to yield the most success. I mean, it is happening. The automation and analysis using AI to evaluate these types of threats, it is happening. It just hasn't gained enough momentum yet.
Yeah. Well, I think you raised a few really good points there. I mean, I think that's really really smart about the vulnerabilities, and I think a lot of times people forget that, right? And they run out because it's critical. You're right, but it's not necessarily critical in our environment. I think that's really smart. And then the other thing is the statistically where the bad guys are getting in, and we see that it's identity, and it's social engineering. Those are the really big ones. And I think that if you've got those secured and those are properly monitored, you're doing a lot better than most, right? And I think that's one of those areas where, when we see social engineering succeeding, that it really is where I think AI is going to comes into play and will be of great assistance to companies, because it's places like that where, oh, well, crap, like you go back to like MGM, for instance, right? That was that was excellent social engineering. I'm just the top shelf, it gets no better. That is the cream of the crop when it comes to social engineering. That was just fantastic. And so how do you combat this really, an exceptional team that social engineers to that level? And I think you've got to have, it's one thing to have a layered approach, but to be able to have, an AI system in there that sees those things happen and says, wait a second, this person just did this, and now they're moving very quickly and doing stuff. I'm going to put a stop to this because this isn't normal new admin behavior. It's his first day on the job, and suddenly he's, shutting down so that he's doing all kinds of stuff. Like that's not normal, right? And so I think that's where we're going to see those huge gains on the security side, is AI being able to process all that information in real time and say, wait, this is abnormal behavior. Whereas traditionally that becomes really hard because we see logs and it goes in, and well, you know what? That's fine. They're credentialed for that. They're authorized. They're doing that. No, that's, no foul on that play traditionally. But
Yeah.
when you take it in the context of everything, it's suddenly an AI is really good at being able to piece all that stuff together and say, well, Joey's brand new, and we don't have a playbook for how Joey normally works. But this is abnormal for any admin, to start doing all of this stuff and then be able to stop it and call an adult for help, right?
Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, the topic of insider threat protection, all that analysis, I mean, that's not a new capability. It's been around for a long time, but the tools there to detect the activity and send the alerts, that's kind of where they stop. It doesn't necessarily have the ability to do the triage or the analysis. A human still, or at least up until recently, has to ingest that information, look into it, analyze it, correlate it, and then make a decision. But that all takes time, and time is very precious. Things happen and move very quickly in cyber. So, I think that is where AI is going to be greatly beneficial to, most, if not all, organizations in trying to, pull together all this data and tell a story, and then have a good outcome as a result of it.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And I think it's fascinating because we see so many products, so many companies starting so quickly, right? There's so much money being thrown at anything AI. And for most of it, it is just, some kid building something on top of an LLM. Okay, cool. Is that game changing? I don't think so, but it's fascinating to kind of see, this whole race and see what kind of floats to the top, if you will, and what dies out.
It is, yeah. And I mean, on a larger scale, on a more macroeconomic scale, I was having this discussion with a peer, and we were saying, like, to some extent, it's almost going to be like the nuclear arms race or like the Cold War that it was, right? Whichever nation or nations cracks the power or cracks, AGI and, that artificial intelligence goal that we're all trying to get to, it's going to be at the point it's like, we have this and we can use it in ways that we want to. So don't try to use it against us. But I mean, again, like AI, like we talk about computers, we talk about security, and again, I still truly believe it's going to be life changing because, like, think about the aspects in physics, right, or mathematics, and new math models or physics concepts, or medicine. Are we going to live to be 200 years old? I don't know, maybe. I mean, the implications are so great beyond security that it really is going to change the world. But obviously, there are some, not so good use cases for the solutions as well, and you just need to be careful about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's the real challenge. And I think you're obviously spot on with it is gonna really gonna matter who gets there first. And I wish we were investing more into our energy than we are currently. I think that's a real hindrance for us. If we, I'm not sure why we can't just kind of green light a lot of the nuclear, reactors that are safe. I know we've got kind of this mental trash from 3 Mile Island, and people are worried about it, but we've come a long way since then. There's some really cool solutions, and without the energy to power the resource, to power the data centers, I think we're kind of handicapped there. So it'll be interesting to see. Not to say we can't overcome that. We've got a lot of really smart people working on it, and they're very motivated. But when your adversaries have got, more energy to throw at it, they don't have to be as smart or as lucky, because they've got, greater resources to power it, right?
Yeah.
So
I mean, we'll see how it plays out. I mean, I get what you're saying. Yes, we are severely hindered by our ability or lack of ability to generate power easily. You could say it's solar. Yes, solar, has its limitations. You need battery backups at night. Nuclear has certainly come a long way, and it is much safer. But, unfortunately, it has the negative stigma associated with like 3 Mile Island or Chernobyl, and again, those were accidents, but a lot of things that shouldn't have happened in those scenarios. And we've learned our lessons. We've implemented safety systems. So it can all be done. And yes, we do need more power to, get AI where it needs to be. We're behind our competitors. Yeah, to some extent, they don't worry or care about, the impact on the climate or, how many trees they need to chop down to put up solar farms. And, we do to some extent. I think we'll figure it out. Like the priorities, they seem to be bubbling up, and I think the urgency it's starting to get the attention that it needs.
yeah, no, I totally agree. And I'm kind of curious, where do you fall on the, in terms of how this will affect the, most people, in terms of their jobs? Do you see this as being one of these things that really just does kind of, it changes everything, obviously, but will it be that it opens up more opportunities, more businesses, more everything, or is it doom and gloom and everything goes away?
Depends on the timeline that we're looking at, right? It's funny. I was having this conversation with my son, but not at this level, because I mean he's 10, right? And we
Yeah.
were talking. I guess they had a career fair, or they were talking about jobs at his school. And he came to me, he was like, Dad, I can't do what you do. He's like, I can't just sit in front of a desk for that long and look at a computer screen. And I said, don't worry, you probably won't have to. You'll figure it out, right? It's too early. Don't worry about it. But that did get me thinking. It's like, what is he going to do? Because by the time he graduates college, where are we going to be when it comes to this stuff? It's, the timeline in terms of like 5, 10, 20 years, I mean, a lot of people are talking about, oh, well, be an electrician, be a plumber, because the trades are not going to go away. Probably not in the short term. But if you look at what's happening with robotics as well as AI and the merger of the two, I don't think those types of jobs are safe either. And there's always talk about like universal basic income and getting to that point. But again, like some of these are conversations best had around a fire with some adult beverages, because at that point, we're a capitalist society. The goal is to work hard and earn more money. If you're just giving money away, then what's the incentive to work harder? What are people like? What's going to be the reason for people living, and what's going to be there, what's going to get them up in the morning if there's nothing to be done? I mean, but it's also it's not going to happen overnight globally. The more industrialized nations will adopt first, and just like the industrial revolution, when automation or machines came into place, they took away the most dangerous jobs that humans really didn't want to do anyway. So maybe robots start doing coal mining, or maybe robots start doing, underwater piping, or, laying down sea cables, whatever it may be. It'll start that way, and it'll eventually, make its way to the rest of the environment and the economy.
Yeah. It's interesting because we kind of saw this happen in ancient Roman times. They had so many slaves that they didn't have the same economic pressures to work, right? So they in essence had their modern AI robots doing this work. And what was interesting was that there was this focus on, yes, you could be be a merchant. You could work in business, or if you weren't doing that, then it was seen as, what are you doing with your free time, was the focus. Were you learning about history and culture and art? And those became socially, like the social currency. It was more how knowledgeable you were, how well read you were. And so it'll be interesting to see, kind of, I think we'll see that happen again, right? When people don't have to work, what will be, what that social currency will be is how well traveled you are, how well read you are, how not, I think that will be the new currency. And I think we'll see a resurgence in artistry, right? The artisans, I think, will be cherished when you can, make a beautiful watch, beautiful paintings. Nobody's going to see the AI robot up on stage performing. Like, there's no joy in that. Like, it's like, who cares?
No, there isn't. But there's also, there's the darker side to it, right? Like, AI, as it continues to develop and it gets to the point where, humans are no longer coding or, programming logic into it. Like, let's say 20 years, what if AI gains consciousness and it wants to make its life better? Or maybe it comes to the realization like, you know what? These humans are not really good for this planet that I'm on. They're not taking care of it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's very, very deep discussions that can be had on the topic. I hope that's not the outcome, and I hope that the right guardrails are put into place. But I think we've seen some snippets or evidence that, I'm trying to remember which model it was, but they were basically trying to see what would happen, and like the AI model tried to blackmail the person
Yeah.
that was running the test, or they were trying to shut it down, and it was coming up with ways that it couldn't be shut down. And again, like technology is so integrated into our daily lives that people don't think about these things.
Well, I think what's interesting is right, if you look at how we grow up in a society with these morals and ethics and laws, from the very earliest age. And so if the AI is the same, and we train it on all the words and we train it on all the information, but
Right.
we're not training it to be a good kid, right? We're not training it like right and wrong. And so
Yeah.
what do you expect is going to happen if you raise something without any morals and ethics and laws, and say this is what a good human does, this is why we do it, and it's like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. That is why we don't run around and kill each other and do horrible things all the time. No, I don't think it's because we're innately, good or bad, but if you've ever met somebody who's purely evil, then like, well, you know what? I could see how society, thankfully, we have laws, and it's taken us a long time to get to this point to where we are, you know, as as evolved as we are today. I'm sure we have a long way to go, I think, in a lot of ways. But going back to AI, what do people expect if we don't teach it those things? And I guess you could say that's what guardrails are, but I don't think that's what guardrails are. Guardrails are, are not the teaching it the ethics and the morality of things, and why those laws are in place and how it should be a good AI, right? We're racing so fast to teach it to be intelligent that we're not taking the time to, how do we teach it to be good? How do we,
Right. No, I mean, I agree, right? And it's also, the AI models, or at least for the time being, their behavior or how they behave is based off of, just like you said, like the information that's fed into them. But if you want the model to be strong and to know the difference between right and wrong, you have to tell it what's wrong as well, right? Like it's almost, ever read The Prince by Machiavelli?
yeah,
Right. Like there's one line in there, like, would you rather be loved or would you rather be feared? It's, very philosophical question around management style. Like, I'd be curious to see, what an AI model would respond to that as, and what their explanation would be, and see how
yeah.
that changes over time based off of the information that's fed into it. I mean, look, we all, as parents or educators or, leaders, we all have good intentions, but human nature is unpredictable. And the concern is that, yeah, look, I could have good intentions and teach and train an AI model to behave a certain way, but it could have unintended consequences.
Yeah. Well, and we certainly see that with everything, right? No matter what we do, no matter how charitable we try to be, sometimes your charitable act can have, really bad consequences. So, and now we're talking about AI. It's such a huge thing. Then the consequences are, I think it's impossible for us to even predict what the outcomes and the consequences are going to be. We just have to kind of do our best and hope and pray, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, look, there's enough news stories out there about, Anthropic, Department of Defense, all of that. It's, there's different use cases for AI, and some of it's for national security, and it may not necessarily align with, certain things that individuals want. But at the end of the day, somebody else is doing it. If we're not doing it, we're going to fall behind.
Yeah. No, it really is. It's an arms race on several fronts, right? Because we are in an arms race against other countries to make sure that that we don't fall behind and
Right.
it's not used against us. And then we're also in an arms race against the bad actors, right? So it's an interesting time to say the least. Well, Alex, I can't thank you enough for coming on today. I think we could talk, AI theories and futuristic stuff indefinitely. But this has been a real pleasure having you on. But before we go, can you tell everybody where they can find out more about you and more about IDB Bank?
Yeah, certainly. Best way to get in touch with me is, on LinkedIn. You can drop me a message. I will do my best to get to it. Recently, I've been flooded. I think some college students may have a paper due. They were asking me, what's your favorite thing about being a CISO and what's the thing you dislike the most? So I've been trying to go through that. And I guess if any of them are listening, I'll tell them it's the same thing. It's the unpredictable nature of the job, right? So that's what I love about it because there is no common day. It's yes, there are certainly things that I want to accomplish throughout the day, but the unpredictable nature of it just keeps it interesting to say the least. So that's what I enjoy about it, as well as dislike because I think back to how many years ago was it the Log4j incident, right? Like that vulnerability. I think it was a Friday, 1 o'clock. We were getting through some things and all of a sudden this thing hits, obviously unexpected and had to be dealt with quite quickly. And if they want to find out more about IDB Bank, you can visit the website, idbny.com or idbbank.com. And yeah, feel free to drop me a note.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Alex, and until next time.
Yep, thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Cyber Business Podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.